Welcome everyone to Melfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Shogun, episode 7. It's called A Stick in Time, so spoilers for the episode. This one's got Toranaga trying to form this alliance with his brother to possibly enact Crimson Sky, although I suspect that there's something fishy going on. Basically, what I'm saying is that whatever we see in this episode, I've got a feeling that at the end, not the final scene's obviously just just a fitting end for a character who is determined to die in a stupid way. But the decision, Toranaga's decision, once all that stuff's set up and he makes his decision to surrender himself, I feel like this is actually Toranaga with a plan. And I think that he might even have Blackthorn helping him, because Blackthorn's whole like standing up and getting angry and yelling about how they're already dead when Toranaga makes his decision and storming out felt like it might have been a performance. It felt like it might have been something, I'm almost thinking back to that scene in, was it episode 2? No, episode 3, when they're leaving the palace in Osaka and he starts making a commotion so they won't check the little cabin for Toranaga. It was giving me kind of vibes of that in a weird way. It was more dramatic, don't get me wrong, it wasn't as silly by any means, but I was getting those vibes. But yeah, I should probably explain what that choice is that Toranaga makes, because it's not the choice that he set up with until this episode gets going, because we meet his brother. His name is Saike, or Saike, probably butchering the pronunciation of that. But he seems like a little tense, but ultimately friendly to begin with, where they end up spending a night feasting, drinking, and he tells stories about his brother to notably his son, right? Nakakado, who is like, obviously a big thing from him is that he wants to get into fights, he wants to be an honorable soldier, he wants to go and die in battle or have the glory of battle, and he's hearing all these stories about how much of a legend his father is and kind of wants that for himself, which obviously meets its hilarious demise at the the end of the episode. But that turns sour when it's revealed that Seiko is actually already made a deal with Ishido and is there to serve kind of like a summons to go and surrender. Also tries to give Nagakado like his like orders to commit seppuku for murdering that other general that Ishido already sent like episodes ago. So it's like, oh crap. And also his army, his forces have surrounded the village and are blocking all the exits. They're not allowed to leave. So a lot of this episode takes place over like a day where Toranaga is deciding what to do about this, what is his response going to be. And there's lots of other characters and little things going on throughout this. Some before it, but a lot after. The episode also opens with Toranaga, like a flashback to him. It turns out to be like 12. I thought it was a little bit older than that, but they say he's 12 when he won his first battle and he was given the task of decapitating the opposition, the general who lost the fight. He commits seppuku and Toranaga is meant to chop off his head. And that's one of the things that comes up, is that the legend is that this 12-year-old swiped off this guy's head in one slash, but Toranaga brings up later on with the old man, he's like, hey, you were there, like, what's this one slash business? It was like 8 slashes. It was quite messy and quite horrific. It wasn't this glorious thing we should all be proud of being in battle. Toranaga even says to his son at one point, why is it those who have not been in battle are so eager to be in one? That's something, that's like a great theme, sort of recurring thing that comes back in a lot of movies about war and things like that. Hell, even just thinking of Japan, Godzilla -1, one of the big themes of that movie was the characters who wanted to rush off to war because they felt like it was like their honor, their glory, and that's what they're supposed to do. But the ones who have all been through it are all like, no, this is horrific and we should avoid this at all costs. That's like a running thing throughout the episode for sure. But there's definitely a few key things that make me think that there's something going on here, because Toranaga ultimately says that he's surrendering and that Crimson Sky is a mistake and that he's going to go and hand himself in to Ishido, and his brother Seiko says, yeah, I'll take you to the palace, I'll escort you personally with my men. And like, I'm already thinking maybe there's something fishy about this. but it was really Blackthorn standing up and saying they're already dead and making a bit of a commotion that kind of felt like there was something going on here, especially the way that he specifically called out a couple of names. He mentions in Nagakado, and he mentions Yubashige. In fact, Yubashige and Blackthorn have one of my favorite scenes of the whole show at this point, which it's a very good scene because it's a little bit funny, but it's really good dramatically in terms of like looking at the show as a whole, because it really shows just how much Yubashige is starting to shit himself and how desperate the situation they're all in is, because he tries to train Blackthorn how to use his katana, right? He thinks, oh, he's going to have to actually know how to use that. And Yubashige's not friends with him. He doesn't have like any sort of great respect for Blackthorn. You know, we've seen that from a couple of characters, but not from him. So it's this idea that he's so like feeling put in a corner that they're all screwed that he starts training Blackthorn on the beach. And, you know, it's not going very well. He's hitting the sword out of his hand. Blackthorn's doing terribly. It takes a bit of a sudden turn, of course, when Bintaro, you know, Mariko's husband jumps in and like puts a sword to his neck. What I thought he was about to do was that he was just going to, well, I didn't think Blackthorn was actually going to die. I didn't think they were going to kill off the seemingly main character in episode 7, but I thought, you know, Yubashige was going to stop him, but what I thought he was trying to do was like claim that he thought like this wasn't training, that he thought that Blackthorn was actually trying to kill Yubashige and he jumped in to defend him. It doesn't actually go that path. He doesn't do that. It's more like he just lost his cool. Like he's just seething in hatred and had to act out. And it leads to some scenes with Mariko and with Toranaga where he goes and requests that when this is over, he wants to he wants permission to kill Blackthorn. And Toranaga's like, why? He's like, because he looks at my wife. He's like, you're accusing him of trying to, like, you know, make relations with your wife? Yes. And then he fires back at him, well, are you also accusing your wife of wanting to do this? Because if you're killing him, you're going to have to kill her too. And the one thing that's been set up between him and Mariko is that she wants to die and he's, like, not allowing it. So he basically backtracks and says that he's spoken petty words and that he's not accusing his wife, and kind of, you know, crawls away from the scene, effectively. But that leads to an even more interesting scene between Toranaga and Mariko, where Toranaga is like, okay, what's going on? Like, you have to kind of make a choice here. Are you, like, loyal to me and your father's, like, goals and you want to help? Or are you more, like, loyal to Blackthorn now? What is it? Like, you're going to have to make a choice. And she doesn't really make a choice. She instead just insists that she wants to die still. Like, Mariko's a very sad and tragic character in a lot of ways. And so is Fuji, because Fuji also reiterates this episode that she wants to die when her service is complete, so she can be with her family again. And the old man's kind of like, why? Why? You know, like, your husband and child died for potentially this new future we make. But this is before the you know, the whole brother, like, turning his back on Toranaga. So the situation of the rest of the episode's not happened yet when this conversation happens. But the old man's like, hey, like, this future we might be able to build, like, your husband died for that. Maybe you should, you know, live in it, like, relish in it, enjoy it because he died for it. Yeah, so it's a bleak episode. It's almost darkly funny at points, but it's a very bleak episode. And I think this idea of Toranaga cooking something, you know, back in episode 3 again, he didn't tell most of the people involved that he was pulling this ruse, that he was secretly on the trip out of the city with them. You know, Yubashige kind of said as much. He's like, hey, it'd be nice to be let in your plans once in a while, like, before you actually enact them. And I've got a feeling that's what's happening here, where Toranaga surrenders, you know, that plays out. It's so funny that his son keeps kind of, like, jumping in and doing things irrationally. Obviously, we had the big ending with the cannons in, like, episode 4 or 5, where him and the nephew character, Ono, just decided to try and have this show of strength, which just escalated things. And likewise, at the end of this episode, he tries to assassinate his uncle. He tries to assassinate Seiki. And I actually thought the prostitute was going to kill him. Like, Kiku, her name is, when she sort of leaves the scene, she says, hey, we've got more tools that'll enhance your pleasure. Because he's in a bit, he's into the sort of the David Carradine thing a little bit. He's sort of like, he's got her strangling him with like a bit of clothing whilst they're having sex, and she goes off under the guise of getting something, and that's when Nagakado jumps out and tries to kill him, and he's naked, he's not got a lot of like, it's a fight breaks out where some of his servants try to jump out, and some people on Nagakado's side are there, so there's fighting around him, but he's kind of like, this should be an easy victory. He kind of has him cornered out in the rain next to the pond, and just as he goes to take the swing, he slips and hits his head on a rock and is lying there dying at the end of the episode. And I think I do like the ending a lot, because this character, Nagakado, has been, it's been consistent throughout the whole show about him wanting glory, about him fetishizing the idea of battle and being in a battle. He brings it up numerous times this episode. So to see him like not understand the weight, in fact, one of the things he said earlier on was that, I hear your first kill in battle's even better than your first woman. And, Yumashige cracks a little joke about it, but you kind of get this sense that none of the old timers, none of the vets are going to agree with this. This is clearly some young, foolish idea of, again, fetishizing the idea of killing people in battle, and that this is something he wants to happen. So him to go out this ironically, where he's about to take his first kill, and he slips and dies, especially when we have that to mirror, like, his father's first kill. At least, well, it's not 100% sure it's his first kill per se, but when he had to kill the general in the flashback, where it wasn't this thing where he just swiped off his head like a hero or like a badass. It was this awkward, clunky, like just messy experience that didn't quite work. But I sound like I'm describing first time sex now that I'm thinking about it. But there's a lot of comparisons there. In fact, hell, even in episode 1, there was a comparison between sex and in death with Yubashige, right? The idea that he liked watching someone die, and then that translated to him liking watching someone having sex. So that comparison has already been made in the show, and here it is again, somewhat in this episode. So I suspect this was, like, obviously I don't think Toranaga approved of this. This was Nagakado, possibly with the nephew character Ono. I think, or not Ono, Omi, sorry, I'm forgetting the names here. Omi, Yubashige's nephew. I've got a feeling this was them, again, being brash and trying to solve the problem in their way. And if Toranaga does have a plan, and this entire show has taught me that he usually has a plan that he's been secretive about, this was just like him putting himself in this situation and getting killed. And honestly, Toranaga's reaction to this could prove interesting. It might, in a weird way, free him a little bit to keep making harder decisions, but I'm not really sure. But it is kind of it's definitely a tragic ending. It's a little bit funny because it is so comical the way he slips and dies, but it is obviously tragic and kind of this sad, fitting ending for his attitude up until this point in the show. The other scene that makes me think that Toranaga's got something cooking is the scene with the brothel owner, Jin, I believe her name is, where she wanted to speak to Toranaga and is able to do so in the middle of the episode with a stick burning, that when it burns out, that's the time up, hence the title, Stick of Time. This scene might even be the scene where Toranaga, like, basically forms a plan, perhaps, maybe, like, because it does kind of feel like he is kind of lost, and he does kind of suspect that his time is almost up, that maybe he has been backed into a corner and there's no real way out of this. And Jin is there with an idea that, when all this is over and he's in rule and he's building this bigger city in Edo, that she wants, like, not just like a brothel, but she wants it to become like a district, and she wants it to sort of take care of the women who are the prostitutes when they grow older and the men don't want them anymore. And it seems like she's trying to think of the future. And Toranaga says, well, thanks for this distraction, but I don't think I'm going to be here for much longer. I think my end is nigh. I'm paraphrasing, but this was the gist of what he was saying. She gets a little bit more direct with him. Like, she stops being as, cordial and submissive, and kind of speaks a bit more frankly. about how he usually has a plan and how this isn't like him to give up. And it kind of feels like maybe this little moment here is when he kind of either maybe he did already have a plan, but this is the moment where like he either lowers his guard and almost sort of like you can see it in his face that maybe he does have a plan, or arguably he was kind of lost, but in this moment he's been inspired to come up with a plan. If not what the plan is yet, he's been inspired in this moment to be like, okay, you know what, you're right, I'm Toranaga. I always have a plan. I'm going to plan my way out of this. I'm going to do something. Whether or not that's even... And this would make the ending of this episode even more tragic. But what if his brother is actually secretly still on his side and the whole plan revolves around him getting him... Because it's like, okay, they've already established that a lot of his army were killed in the earthquake a couple of episodes ago. So what if the idea here is just to get Toranaga close to Ishido that he can assassinate him, because we don't have the military force to actually storm the city if they can see us coming. So what if it is more about just being more direct than that? And that would just make the ending of this episode even more tragic, that his son threw his life away trying to murder his uncle, who was actually still secretly working with his father. I mean, maybe he wasn't, maybe I'm wrong. This is just one idea. But it does feel like there's something secretive going on here. And it feels like a lot of the other characters around Toranaga are really in a hopeless place. Whether it's Blackthorn feeling helpless and wanting his ship, not even to run away, he's basically saying, give me my ship so I can help you storm the city, I can help you fight. Like he's getting frustrated that he's not been told what he's supposed to do or how he can help. And then you've got Mariko reiterating once again that she wants to die. Buntaro is in a really rough place. Yubashige is so scared shitless that he's trying to train Blackthorn how to use a katana. It feels like everyone's kind of at their worst possible place in this episode. So I think it'll be very interesting to see if there's like a moment of hope at the right time. I could see that being a very uplifting kind of like turning point for the show. And I'm not saying I expect it next episode necessarily either. We might be a little too early for that quite yet, but I could see it there being kind of like a rug pulled out from under us. I expect next episode might be quite depressing still, just because Toranaga's son just died in an idiotic way. And how do we make, how does he react to that? How does he cope with that? And what decisions does he make going forward? I think this is an interesting episode because it's very strong thematically, between tying in the flashbacks of Toranaga to his son and this idea of your first kill. I think that was a consistent theme throughout that was always interesting whenever it came up. And more than any other episode, this episode features several scenes of someone pleading their case in some way to Toranaga. Blackthorn wanting to know what he's going to be doing if they ever actually go through with this Crimson Sky plan. Mariko wanting to die. Buntaro wanting to kill Blackthorn, his son wanting a plan and like a decision on what to do, the Jen the brothel owner wanting these plans for the future. Like, this episode is chock-a-block of people coming to Toranaga and trying to convince him of something, but mostly trying to get something from him because he's the one in charge and he's supposed to be, granting these things. So the weight of him being the leader, of being the warlord, is kind of really heavy in this episode, and I'm very curious to see where this is going. There's an interesting line he has actually when he's making his surrender, where he's like, it doesn't matter what evil is in the country, nothing is worth splitting the realm apart. And I'm curious if there's some truth to that line, about how he's seeing how everything's breaking down and is going to try and I don't know, I can see that line maybe playing very interestingly once maybe we get a taste of what he's actually doing. But the one fundamental thing I'm completely sure of after this episode is that he's got something cooking. I don't believe for a second that he is genuinely had just surrendered. Now, admittedly, what happens now that his son's dead is another question, but very curious. Also, a lot of hot spring stuff in this episode. We see, Toranaga's brother, Saiki, in the hot tub. Yubashige, even though they're like tense by this point because they've got this ultimatum and the village is surrounded, he still goes for a little hot tub action. He gets into the hot spring and enjoys the water. That was just another fun little scene. Like, Yubashige's been such an entertaining character to watch. Him and Fuji aren't like as big in terms of like story characters. Like, obviously Mariko, Blackthorn, and Toranaga are the three main characters with the most meat in terms of who they are. But Fuji and Yubashige are just like very entertaining in all those small pockets whenever they come up for very different reasons as well. It's also interesting. I was speaking last episode about Toranaga maybe trying to bond Mariko and Blackthorn more than they already were. Perhaps with the idea that Blackthorn, if he gets attached to a person, he might be more inclined to stay. I was thinking this episode that with the whole scene with him and Mariko talking about her allegiance and about whether or not she's more loyal to like her father's goals and Toranaga's goals, or to Blackthorn if that's kind of blossoming, thinking in hindsight again about what I was saying about him maybe provoking and stoking the fires of that relationship, I do wonder if he's really just trying to stoke her into wanting to live in the same way that he's trying to stoke the fires to making Blackthorn want to stay potentially. Again, this is just all me reading into things. This has not been said outright on the show. I also wonder if like trying to make her care about someone that isn't her shitty husband, because I think he can clearly see that she's got a shitty husband who I still want him to get comeuppance for hitting her. Like, you know, I'm still looking forward to him dying, to be honest. And I'm looking forward to the fact that if he had died in episode 3 when he was left behind on those docks, that was kind of a heroic ending. He deserves a less heroic ending, so I'm looking forward to whoever meets his demise. But I wonder if that's also part of this. And maybe, again, the surface level thing that he's proposing to her, which is you have to choose between Blackthorn and your loyalties to me and your father. I do wonder if, like, that's what he's saying to her, but what he's actually trying to do is make her care about both, or make her, or provoke her into a certain action. He wants to provoke her into doing something that she's not supposed to do, because, again, he's playing 4D chess, and he's trying to make certain characters care and be passionate about certain things and want to act in certain ways. And again, maybe that even just furthers the tragedy that he couldn't even keep his son in line. Like, the idea that he's provoking these people into maybe acting outside the box and doing things they're not supposed to. He's not doing that with his son, but his son kept doing it anyway, and it led to his death. And maybe if he'd taken more of a hands-on approach, maybe it is telling us that he's a better leader than he is a father. maybe there's some truth to that. But yeah, very interesting character episode, if nothing else. I really like the set piece, or the setup of like, oh, the village is surrounded, we can't leave until we make this decision. I thought after that point it was going to be building up to, okay, how do they all like arrange an escape? Is Blackthorn going to get to his ship and like start firing cannons or something? Like, I was expecting maybe more of a big escape by the end of the episode. Instead, it did, you know, it set up all this stuff. And I'm very intrigued by it. As much as I would have enjoyed all the action that I thought we were maybe going to get, it definitely was a more of a thought-provoking ending. So I'm very curious to see what we do in the next episode. Obviously, we get 3 left, so we'll see how the show wraps up. It's still very good. I'm still enjoying it. I enjoyed the performance of the actor playing the brother. He has kind of like a manic energy to him. He's always got kind of a smirk. He almost feels like he's way more of a caricature than Toranaga is. Where Toranaga is more reserved and like keeps it, you know, under the surface and keeps everything reserved. His brother seems to be a lot more gloaty and smiley. And I wonder again if that's just part of an act to, you know, if they're two sides of the same coin almost. Like, he does all the flash and bang, but he's secretly still working with Toranaga. I don't know. We'll see. We'll find out. But that's my thoughts on episode 7. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. You can help out and support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Help keep all the lights on, keep the content coming. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?